Hello. Well, it's been a while since I've been on here, but the number of questions I'm getting from parents and a few teachers right now on this very topic forced me to say, okay, now it's overdue. There's a lot of things I want to share with people, a lot of hope and a lot of sort out a few misunderstandings. So the question is, if a child is struggling with reading, struggling with attention, is it a sign that they've got hidden genius, yes or no? Well, I'm going to attempt to answer that for you right now. How common is it? It's scarily common. It's scarily common. The truth is now 1 in 4 children are underperforming in reading, and that of course goes on into adult life. These issues don't go away unless you do something quite drastic and quite appropriate, and until recently we didn't even know what that could look like. Well, now we do. And the same was true of ADD. But what teachers tell me, what parents keep telling me, I know there's more there than is coming out in their schoolwork. And it's kind of frustrating. Well, that's for the teachers and the parents. Imagine what it feels like for the child, if it is that they've got wonderful intelligence that's trapped in there, but nobody is finding it for them. Well, I want to share with you some techniques that you can use to discover the truth about the child you're concerned about. And of course that's thrilling for the child, but it's equally as thrilling for the parent too. So what does it look like? Well, in my own case, my own daughter, she seemed perfectly normal, developing in all the right ways until the serious learning started at school, age 6 and 7, when they were hoping and expecting that she'd start to read, and suddenly, wow, the otherwise bright girl was disappearing into a shell, because what was easy for all of the other children was really hard for her. So it comes across as slow at learning. And I want to get out there straight away that you must not make the fault that so many make, linking slow learning with low levels of intelligence. There's actually no link there at all. It's a complete myth. But of course it's one of the myths that adds to the confusion. Teachers are only given the tools of assessments to determine what is this child learning. How much have they taken in? How many questions can they get right? That's just one element, and to me that's not so much learning, it's more about regurgitation than learning. Learning is the ability to make connections in the brain. And one of the things that I keep coming back to is that children that show signs of creativity, you should have huge hope for them, because creativity is the real intelligence. Creativity is putting together ideas that others aren't putting together. Passing tests and exams is just regurgitating what you've been told, and there's a huge difference. So any child that's got a degree of creativity, you must assume there's huge potential there just waiting to be discovered. So that's the first very good sign, but it's not the only one. But the confusion is what we've got to address, and the education system needs to address this in a fundamental way. They need to stop assuming that the best and only way of assessing a child is tests and exams. That actually tells you very, very little about the real underlying intelligence, if anything. And you know, teachers have been treated pretty unfairly too. If they've got in a class of 30, they've got 5 children that are being taught the same way as the other 25 but aren't learning as fast, is that the teacher's fault? Should the teacher feel bad about that? Well, the answer is no, and if we get time today, I'm going to talk about how much is actually being stored in the brain that the child cannot use. Well, we've now found a way of assessing that and addressing that, and it's of great comfort to teachers and of course great comfort to parents to think that their child has actually got potential. So this subject of potential is a word that's used a huge amount, and people are always saying, oh, he's got potential, she's got potential. But up to now, they've never been able to say where that potential is exactly in their brains, how much is there, and then what can you do so that they can use that potential. So potential, unless you can access it, is a waste of time. potential, if you can access it, is very exciting. Well, research that's come out from many of the major universities around the world helps us piece together what we can do, how we can assess it, how we can reveal it. And I want to come on to that. So let me just give you another clue that there might be huge amounts of hidden attention, hidden potential there. You know, I gave my grandson my brand new iPhone the other day, and without looking at the instructions, he sorted it out for me. Now, I'm fairly bright, but I knew I was going to have to sort the instructions out. He just happened to turn up when I was taking it out of the box, and before I knew anything, he'd got it all working. How did you do that? He doesn't even know himself. That's intelligence. And so many children are like that. You give them a new present, they throw the box and the instructions everywhere, and they focus on the new electronic toy or whatever it is and get it working. What's that about? It's skills that many of us adults don't have, and that skills boils down to another clue that there's this huge intelligence there. So if you've got a child that's got creativity, who can sort things out with their instructions, well, that's already two very, very, very good signs. But it's not the things that are picked up in school, and that's what concerns me. If you look in later life, most of the entrepreneurs that we have, the greatest entrepreneurs, most of them didn't do well in school. Many of them dropped out of school or college, but went on to huge success. In other words, enormous potential there, not discovered in our present education system. You know, we've got an education system. Shouldn't it be the best resource ever to find potential and develop it? Well, the truth is it isn't. And when I talk to teachers, they often lament the fact that within the whole of their teacher training process, those children that are struggling, they have very little, if any, training about. So one teacher told me the other day, she spends, it's the 80-20 rule, she says, I spend 80% of my one-to-one time with children that are really struggling. How much training did you have? Oh, I had half a day's training. What, every day or every week? Or no, she said, in the whole of my training, I had half a day on why children struggle. So this is an area that desperately needs an overhaul. And timing is good because so much science has come out recently about why children struggle, the reasons for it, and it's about the way they take information in or don't, as the case may be. What is very outdated is the method of assessing these children. It needs tearing up. The science is no longer supportable. The focus only on phonics is no longer supportable. It hasn't worked. In fact, in my experience, every child that struggled with reading has actually had good phonics ability, and it's not the lack of phonics that's been holding them back. Yet, in many education authorities, many countries, the standard process is give them more phonics or force them to read more. Neither of those are addressing the real root cause. So what is the real root cause? I've worked with about 50,000 children and adults now, most of them with reading issues, and what I found is more than 9 out of 10, in other words virtually all, they have an eye movement issue. The simple fact is that when they're trying to read, their eyes, instead of smoothly following the lines on the page, are jumping about. We've now got a test that you can take a video of what happens to a child's eyes when they try to read, or when they try and track a ball for playing sport, the same problem. Any limitations there, in other words, any inaccuracies in their ability to smoothly track a line, and reading is hard work. In fact, for some, playing sport, especially sport that involves spatial awareness, is hard work. Is that not enough phonics teaching? No. Is it not enough practice? No. That skill has been practiced an awful lot, but it's hit a glass ceiling in development, and that glass ceiling means they cannot smoothly follow a line of page. So the eyes are jumping around, the letters and words are going into their eyes scrambled, and guess what? They see every word spelt in a different way every time they see it, because their eyes are going backwards and forwards and up and down, and spelling for them is really hard work. So do you want just a quick bit of neuroscience? Because this will help you understand why comprehension is difficult. For many children, when reading is hard work, what's happening is their thinking brain is trying to control their eyes. Now, your thinking brain is what gets involved if you haven't got a skill sorted out, if it's not fine-tuned and fully automatized. If you think about learning to ride a bike, when you're thinking about it, you know what to do, and you've got it all in your mind, you've got to balance and you pedal and stay upright and so on. When you're thinking, you fall off your bike. So when the thinking brain is involved, a skill is not finely developed. When you don't have to think about riding a bike, you can ride effortlessly. Well, the same is true of reading skills, and particularly eye tracking. When your eye tracking isn't yet perfectly developed, it's hit a glass ceiling, then reading is hard work because your eyes are going all over the place and your thinking brain is doing its best to hold your eye on the line. Well, some children, they use their finger on the line to help them read, or put a ruler there. Now, those are compensatory strategies. They do help a bit, but what they're trying to achieve with that is give them the extra focus so that their eye stays where the word should be, because that skill is not yet complete in them. So when the thinking brain is involved, it means that the very letters and words they take in also go into the thinking brain, and it's a busy place. There's stuff in there that shouldn't be there, like trying to help control their eyes. And so they can work out what the word is very often, and they've got to store it where? In the thinking brain. And they go on to the next word, and the next word, letters are going in, scrambled again, and all this activity in the thinking brain trying to unscramble the letters and work out what the word is, and they work out what that word is, and they store it here in the thinking brain, and they go all the way to the end of the sentence. But before they get to the end, all the words they've stored before have been pushed out of the way because there's so much mental activity going on right here in their prefrontal cortex. So neurologically, they are absolutely out of their depth trying to comprehend. Some of them actually are pretty good at working out individual words because they've got the intelligence, they actually can work out what it is, but can they store the word so that they comprehend? No, they can't. Now, can you see there's a massive difference between one word ability and comprehension? So I've come across so many children that have got, he does really well at reading. Okay, what sort of test did you give him? Oh, we give him such and such a test. Oh, that's a one-word reading test. That doesn't tell you whether he can comprehend or not. Does the child read for pleasure? Oh, no, very rarely. Oh, why is that? Because it's hard work. Very hard work, because when you're just reading one word and you can't comprehend, it's a waste of time. So teachers, if you're listening, persuade your school, persuade your education authority. One word reading tests are a total waste of time. They should be banned. They tell you nothing about the child's ability to comprehend, and so therefore it gives you no clue about whether or not they're likely to pick up a book and read it for pleasure. Is that making some sense? So if you want to use both a single word reading test and a comprehension test, then when there's a difference, you can have, say, a 3-year gap sometimes between one word reading and comprehension. That tells you, that's working memory overload. That points to a weakness in the development of eye tracking. Now, that's all about reading. And of course, many children with ADD also have issues with reading. And there's a very good reason for that. Because when your eye tracking is poor, your visual gaze is poor. So that's another thing we record in the tests that we use these days. Find out to what extent a child can maintain gaze on a single point. And that gives you a real clue about their ability to pay attention when they're listening. Because very often the skill deficits they have in eye tracking also show up in auditory processing. In other words, the skill you need to turn what you hear, those sound waves that go in here, into thoughts you can comprehend. And for many, you can see the cogs whirring. For many, there's a delay. And for many, it's hard work. Is that low intelligence? No. It's an underdeveloped skill, the skill of auditory processing. A lot of children, they're sent to have their hearing checked, and it comes back okay. Yeah, of course they can hear. But it's the process, it's the skill that comes after they've heard, turning those words into thoughts they can comprehend. So it's comprehension in both cases. So what I've discussed already about reading and listening, for those children that are struggling with ADD stroke dyslexia, it is an issue of incomplete skill development. And that's nothing to do with intelligence. In fact, the irony is, the brighter a child is fundamentally, the more likely he or she is of having some underdevelopment in a fundamental skill. And of course, at school, college, in life, taking information in that we see and we hear are the two primary inputs. So it's not low intelligence for these children, it's lack of ability to take in information that they can process and understand and do something with. So that's a skill. They're both of those that we've talked about are skills. So can you see the frustration I have? Because I meet so many children, when I see a child now that's being told, oh, maybe he's got dyslexia or maybe he's got ADD, I'm actually excited. And I have to explain to the parent or the teacher why I'm excited. Because virtually all of these children I meet have got hidden potential. Well, I told you earlier that we now know where that potential hides. And it's in the cerebellum. Now, what's the cerebellum? You see, the cerebellum is a key part of the brain. It was overlooked for decades. Even neuroscientists ignored it when they took MRI studies of it. Often they cut off the cerebellum. They thought it was so unimportant. Then a professor from Sheffield University, he's now at Edgehill University, started talking about how this part of the brain, the cerebellum, is far more important than anybody's given it credit for, because it's doing all sorts of things to make connections within the brain and connections between brain and body. So it's the master junction box. It's only small, it's only 10% of the volume of the whole brain, and it's literally here at just between the spine and the brain, just in that area there. And it's some are now calling it the brain within the brain because they realise its importance. So it's small, but it's got 3/4 of all our brain cells, all our connections. 3/4 of them. That's how important it is. So an awful lot is talked about, different parts of the brain. Very few have been focusing on the role of the most important part of the brain. Daniel Amen called it the Rodney Dangerfield because of that. So understanding the cerebellum is something that's only been emerging from universities this last few years. And it's been coming out rather like pieces of jigsaw. Wonderful researchers describing one bit, another researchers describing another bit, another researchers describing another bit, all like amazing pieces of jigsaw. And what I've spent the last 20 years doing with my team is piecing together that jigsaw. Why? Because families like yours and teachers like the ones everywhere want to know, how can I make this child that could well be bright show that intelligence? Well, the answer is in developing the cerebellum. So there is an answer. And I've worked with all these folk, giving them exercises to stimulate the cerebellum and reveal that hidden potential. So how do you stimulate the cerebellum? Well, you can give them drugs and keep giving them more drugs and more drugs and more drugs, and that can create some stimulation. And for some, that's been necessary because their behaviour has been so bad. And if I get time, I'll explain that. If not, I'll do that in another video. But there are other ways too. The way the cerebellum in humans develops is by exercises, coordinated exercises very early on in childhood. So children are born with the cerebellum undeveloped. They can do nothing. They can't walk, talk, do anything. But then gradually in the early weeks and months of their life, the cerebellum is developing like crazy, creating skills. And fortunately, most of those skills develop normally, and we develop into regular human beings. So we've got skills that just about do everything. The skill of walking is a very complex skill. The skill of talking is a very complex skill. But the skill of looking, controlling our eyes, processing that information, creating spatial awareness is a crucially important skill. The skill of listening and turning what you hear into thoughts you comprehend is an incredibly important skill. And if you stimulate the cerebellum in the right way, you can continue the development of those skills. You can break through that glass ceiling. You can reveal the potential that's been hiding there because it was never a lack of intelligence. Intelligence is the fundamental ability of the brain to do things. Well, the brain has got huge potential. The only lack is the amount of connections we've got. Well, the cerebellum is the master junction box. The more you can do with the cerebellum, the more of the brain's potential you can reveal. So the exercises that we've worked on, when you piece them together, there's two different types of exercise we do at the same time, and they're not cardio, they're not hard work exercises, but they're brain challenging exercises. And if you do those for 10 minutes a day for a few months, you can increase the density of grey matter in the cerebellum. That's been proven. And also the scientific journal Nature now says when you put that combination of exercises together, you multiply the stem cells in the cerebellum. How awesome is that? You know, that's where plasticity comes from. Plasticity is the possibility of the brain, the readiness of the brain to make new connections. You imagine making new connections in the master junction box of the brain. So you've got more parts of your brain pulled together with more connections, more parts of the brain and body, so all of your sensory inputs, everything the brain is, everything your body is learning, the information it's getting can be processed better. That's how you get better eye tracking. That's how you get better auditory processing. That's how you get better at sport and social skills. And when you improve all these skills, when you make them more automatic, remember I was talking about the issue with the thinking brain, it gets full of stuff that shouldn't be there. If it has to help out with eye movement skills, if it has to help out with listening skills, or any other skills for that matter, it's busy doing stuff it shouldn't have to do. It's only having to do it because the skill has not been properly developed. Well, if you develop the cerebellum can naturally continue the development of those skills and take that child or the adult further along the line of having a complete suite of having automatized skills. And if it's helping with eye tracking, then reading becomes easier. You know, all the children we've dealt with, if you sort out the eye tracking, reading is always easier, without fail. If you sort out auditory processing, listening and paying attention for longer periods is so much easier, so they do it for longer. You know, these things are hard work when they're not developed. When you have to think about something, the processing here is typically 100,000 times slower than up here in the cortex where it should be processed. So if a child is struggling with listening, concentration, or reading, then they are working far harder than others. So please never, ever, ever let anybody say your child is lazy if they're struggling with those things, because the probability is they're working harder in the first 10 minutes of the day than other children in the class would spend all day. So they're working very, very hard. So let's understand them. These children are brighter than we think, they're working harder than we think, and yet totally misunderstood. So let's get rid of, once and for all, the assumption that these children are not very bright, because the opposite is likely to be the case. So one final piece of neuroscience. When your thinking brain is full of stuff that needn't be there, when you're having to work hard, when you can see the cogs whirring, when they're trying to do things, this is also the area that controls emotions. So often they get frustrated easily. This is the area that controls impulsivity. So they're likely to do things that they shouldn't because they won't be thinking it through. It's the area that makes decisions. They'll often make short-term decisions. It's the area which controls their memory. So they'll often have a poor memory. It's where you organize things. So organization won't be as easy. So can you see there's that vicious circle? Poor development of fundamental skills leads to overload in working memory, which can lead to other things going wrong. Well, I hope this makes some sense. So to answer the question, yes, I firmly believe that virtually all children that struggle with learning and development have got more potential. I'm not going to say you can turn them all into rocket scientists, but you can find much of that potential by doing some basic things, repeating the things that weren't finished off in early childhood, by developing the cerebellum. And today, lots of healthcare providers, chiropractors and others are getting our equipment in there because guess what? They see so many patients with exactly these issues and they haven't got tools to deal with the root cause. Well, they are doing far more than that now because their equipment is showing the potential. then they're helping them find ways of revealing that potential, stopping that child being misunderstood. So if you've got a child like that, if you care about a child like that, or if you're trying to teach a child like that, then I'd urge you to look into this. And if you want to find out where your nearest healthcare provider is that's got this equipment, leave me a message, send me a message, and I will hook you up with, or find you the closest clinic that's got it. And if there isn't one in sensible driving distance for you, we'll find another way of you getting access to the tests that will give you hope. The kind of hope that maybe you've never had, but if you're a parent, you've probably had the hunch that there's more there. Well, I want to give you the proof that there's more there, and I want to point you to ways that you can reveal that. So be well, have a great day. Thank you for showing so much interest.